Is that what it is? Fantastic. Okay, thank you very much.
Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for coming along tonight. Just very brief introduction. As you've heard, my name's Andrew Ashdown. I'm an Anglican priest, although I have stepped aside from 25 years of parish ministry in order to just start a PhD research full-time into Christian-Muslim relations in Syria. I've been travelling to Syria, and I must say that when I've been to Syria, I have not been representing the Anglican Church or representing anybody particularly, but going out with a passion to hear the voices, to see the realities. I've been travelling to Syria since 2003. I made several visits to the country prior to the conflict, leading groups, visiting communities, and travelling all over the country, including the northeast and the south, all areas of the country. In 2010, I took my family on holiday to Syria, hired a car and travelled all over the country then, meeting friends and travelling and beginning to see some of the kinks in what was happening. But very interesting, when I met a leading internal opposition figure in Syria last year, he said that he was contacted by phone in 2010 from somebody in Turkey saying, get ready, the war is coming, it's all been planned. And that was in 2010. Also in 2010, very interestingly, was that the country was heaving under the stress of like in so many times in the history of Syria, Syria was a place of hospitality. And in 2010 it had 1.5 million Iraqi refugees of different communities being looked after by the Syrians. And of course it also had about 1 million rural people from the northeast of the country as a result of the drought across the Euphrates region, the Jazeera region, had also descended into the cities. And this was creating some unrest and imbalance within the society, within the community as well. I've visited Syria 5 times since April 2014, three times as a member of delegation, once to go and give a lecture at Damascus University, once as just individually, as going to visit friends and spending time in February by myself, without company, in the country. And in September I led a delegation, an unofficial delegation of a few peers and senior figures to Syria, and we were the first British group to reach Aleppo in September, although Vanessa and Eva had visited a month previously, and I'm going to let her speak about Aleppo, but in fact the journey that she will describe, the realities that she will describe, are exactly, absolutely what we discovered as well when we visited there in September. I have to say as well, for both of us, and for anybody who's been, and I think for anybody who's remotely associated with Syria, this is an emotional connection. It cuts deep. And when you go into these situations, when you meet the people, when you see the realities, it really cuts to the heart. And that's why we come back with a passion to share those realities, and to share some of the injustices, and to talk about some of the misrepresentation that is being given out in the media. But what I'm going to do, and I'm going to speak not for very long, I'm going to give a sort of introductory context, if you like, to Syria, a little bit about some of the things going on from a faith perspective, and some of my experiences, and then I'm going to hand over to Vanessa to talk as an independent investigative journalist with more of the detail on some of the issues that Syria is facing. But starting with context, Syria is known as a country of diversity. This map has its limitations, actually, but it shows you a little bit of the many different communities. Syria is one of the most diverse countries within the whole of the Middle East. It has Sunnis across the board, kind of shade of Sunnis, right from the very conservative, right from the Wahhabis, through to the liberal, secular Sunnis as well. The same breadth of Shias as well in the community. Christians, Druze, even a few Jews left. There was a much bigger Jewish community there, of course. And Alawites. And this map sort of gives a little, unfortunately it's not fixed, the screen isn't working quite in the correct way, but it shows how the Sunni tend to be out in the east in the deserts and along the Euphrates. The north there are Kurds, great Christian centres in Hazakeh in the northeast, in Aleppo, very, very strong Christian community in Aleppo, and in the Idlib area. and down in Homs and Damascus as well. The Druze down in the far south, and the Golan Heights, and of course the west coast region, the mountainous region in the west, where the Alawites predominate. But this map is also misrepresentative, because the reality in Syria is that all these communities have always lived together. It's not a place where there have been ghettos of Jews and Christians and Muslims here, there and everywhere. They have tended to live together. This is a diverse, plural society where people have lived together. And this gives a little sort of summary of the makeup of this community. I want to also say a little qualifier to this slide as well. A criticism that could be justly and validly made, in fact, by some Syrians. Some Syrians have said to me, when you talk about different faith communities, you're actually creating a sectarian vision. To do this, what I want to illustrate is the breadth and diversity of the communities, not the fact that they are sectarian, although there is a sectarian underlying issues that have been there. But actually, Syria has been known mainly for its diversity and its tolerance is a horrible word, but mutual living together. But you have 74% Sunni Muslims, and again I stress that that's across the whole range. 13% other, which would include the Shia, the Alawites, and the Ismailis. The Druze are about 3%. Christians, this is before the conflict, so we can't give accurate figures for now, obviously. And the Christians were anything between 8 and 15%. And the Christian communities, too, are very, very diverse. They've got Eastern Orthodox, Oriental Orthodox, Catholic denominations, Protestant denominations, and some of the very ancient churches as well. And Syria has always been a place at the crossroads of civilizations. At various times it's been under the Assyrian Empire, under the Babylonian Empire, under the Greek Empire, under the Roman Empire, under the Umayyad Caliphate, under the Byzantines, and under the Ottomans. And throughout these eras, the faiths and the communities and the cultures have left their mark. So if you go to the ancient sites in Syria, you see the writing in Greek, in Syriac, in Latin, in all sorts of languages. And these three sites represent some of those empires. The Greek cities that are there in the Levant for a few hundred years. Greek, and in fact, when Islam came from the Arabian Peninsula, Christians were influential in conveying Greek philosophy to Muslims, and were part of the Caliphate as well. You had the Roman Empire, and now you've got Palmyra. Sadly, that complex is shown in the picture. Most of that complex has been destroyed by ISIS. The eastern edge of the Roman Empire, but on the starting points of the Great Silk Route. So the connections with Persia, with the Middle East, with Asia, out through to China, and then of course down to Arabia, down to Ethiopia. All these connections. It was a trade route, cross connections of people and communities. And then the devastating result of the Crusades. We can never overstate the impact of the Crusades, when Christians in their thousands went and committed massive massacres of Christians, Muslims and Jews, because they didn't understand that this was a diverse community, a diverse culture. And that history is really embedded. It's often said that in the Arab world, Americans tend to think in decades, Europeans think in centuries, Arabs think in millennia, and there's a lot of truth in that. And then you get to the last century, and I can't go through the history of the last century, but just to illustrate how the events of 100 years ago, the Sykes-Picot, when France and Britain, after the breakup of the Ottoman Empire, came and carved up the Middle East according to their own agendas, according to their own economic interests. There's a wonderful thing written in a book, paragraph written in a book, which says, the role that outside nations played in attempting to manipulate and control the destiny and resources of Syria cannot be underestimated in the psychology of the country, nor in the nationalistic forces at play over the years, nor in the attitude of the government to outside interference. Throughout history, there has been outside interference on the peoples and the people of Syria. And of course, you have down in the Bath Party was created in the 1930s, which was a secular movement designed to ensure that the country was governed secularly so that no one religious sectarian group dominated in the country. And that was very important. That was the principle behind the Bath Party, both in Iraq and in Syria, although the two did differ in various parts of the country. So you have this tremendous faith heritage and cultural heritage in the country, which actually, believe it or not, even amidst the devastation that surrounds Syria and is within Syria, still exists. Symbolised in a way by this pity it's off the page there, but on the left is a monastery which for years, which was a 7th century monastery, which for years has been a pilgrimage place for Christians and Muslims together, have been there to pray, and they still do so even now. The great Umayyad Mosque in Damascus, one of the great religious centres of the world, I think one of the most beautiful places in the world, which was a basilica when it was built prior to the 7th century. And now, even now, in government-controlled areas, whenever there are special occasions in society or community, the local faith leaders, Christian and Muslim, join together and are working together within society. So what does it look like? There are many Syrias, but there's two very stark separations in the images of Syria. Going to Damascus. Damascus is both a wonderful city and a heartbreaking city. The old city of Damascus, actually, you would think, you go into Damascus in the centre, and you would think life was fairly normal, except for the many checkpoints, which is for security, and the rather occasional shelling of by the rebels into the city centre, randomly, of course, regularly killing people, but that's never mentioned in the media. And on the outskirts, the rebel-held areas which have been largely destroyed. So the city, which is two cities. But in the government-controlled area, in the centre, in the heart of the city centre, in the old city, still, you go into a restaurant, as I've done many times, and Vanessa will have done as well, and you go into a restaurant, and a friend of mine said to me last month when I was in September, he said, "Look, Andrew, that's a Sunni. He's sitting with his friend, that Shia guy. That's a Druze. That's a Christian. This is Syria," he said. "This is the Syria we want to preserve. This is a Syria we want to keep. A Syria that is diverse, that is cultural." Now, prior to the conflict, whatever the political restraints that there were, which there were in Syria prior to the conflict, the country, and some people would find this a hard thing to take or to believe, the country culturally and socially and religiously was one of the beacons of the Middle East. It was diverse, it was plural, culturally and religiously it was amazing freedom there. And that's one of the things that has completely, no, it's not completely destroyed. In the government-held areas, it's there. It's still there. Very different to the rebel-held areas, which we'll come to in a minute. So you have this ancient Christian presence, which is still present, and this is one of the amazing, I know Vanessa has been there, a beautiful Christian village, and it's one of the last places on earth where the language of Aramaic, the language of Jesus, is still spoken. It's a place where Christians and Muslims for generations have gone to for pilgrimage. In 2013 it was occupied by the so-called rebels. When I spoke to those villagers in September and they were telling their story, they talked about how Jabhat al-Nusra and the FSA came in. And I said to them, "Hang on, you said the FSA, Free Syrian Army, these are the moderates, yeah? The so-called moderates." And they said, "Yes, absolutely." But what happened was that they came into the village and they tried to destroy the shrines and the churches. They took the slide on the right there, shows Antoinette. She's sitting in the cave at the back of her house, where she hid when some of our nice moderates, rebels, came into the village, and they came to her house, grabbed her brother and uncle and another male relative, and said to them one by one, "Convert or die." And one by one they refused, and each were shot in turn and killed in this house. The left-hand top side, sadly, again, it's not positioned correctly, but it shows the destroyed shrine again, the shrine that was for centuries. This is a second century shrine. Was destroyed by the rebels. And on the bottom left, you see a 7th century monastery, which I spent 3 days at in November last year. And this monastery is 1 kilometre away from a Sunni Christian village, a shared Sunni Christian village, which has some very important Christian shrines in it. And this monastery last year, it was only 1 kilometre from ISIS front lines. And staying there for 3 nights was quite a profound experience. Very noisy, because every night the shells and the gun battles just nearby falling, the explosions and so forth. But these monks and nuns are there, and they have a very close relationship with the Sunni village, the Sunni Christian village. And every day they ring the church bells loud and clear. They're saying, here we are, and here we are to stay. Here we represent this diversity of Syria that must be sustained. And when ISIS controlled that area for a while, I think in 2014, the Sunni Muslim villagers protected the Christians and protected the monastery and brought food secretly to the monastery. When the ISIS people destroyed, or didn't destroy, very, very badly damaged the ancient churches, the local Muslim people have since helped to restore the churches, and now those churches are sparkling. So it is not simply black and white. It is not as clear cut as you may think. And so I'm talking from a faith perspective. Here, on the right-hand side, we have one of the most remarkable faith leaders, I think, in the world, actually. The Grand Mufti of Syria, Dr. Bakr Hassoun, who is Sunni. He's one of the most liberal Muslim leaders theologically that I've ever met. He's passionate about the diversity of Syria. He's passionate about it being secular-led. And he's passionate about protecting all communities. And he's one that we ought to be talking with, actually. He's keen to talk to people in this country and in Europe, and particularly Muslim and Christians to share this principle of diversity. And on the other side is with a patriarch, but never mind that. So what they do? You've got the ancient faith traditions, the monasteries in Syria, which are still there, which have become centres for Christian-Muslim dialogue. You've got both faith communities working in the schools, and both faith communities working within their communities, their villages and towns, on welfare, particularly for the internally displaced among them, and I'm going to come to that just in a minute, to talk about the internally displaced. Another thing that the faith communities do, which is really, really profound, is the Ministry of Reconciliation. Now, all over Syria, all over the government-held areas of Syria, and in fact in areas that have been taken back from the so-called rebels, the local faith communities are involved in working with the local people to get people of different factions together, to get people who've been fighting together to come to ceasefires, to come to understanding, to try to lay down arms, for those to be reintegrated into their communities that wanted to step back and have a peaceful solution. And this has been successful in some very major cases, particularly in Homs. Now in 2014, these photographs were taken in 2014, I was invited to attend a meeting of the Reconciliation Committee in Homs. This was at the time before the terrorists had been removed, and this group were trying to help arrange that ceasefire process. And we met as there were government figures, there were opposition figures, there were Christians of various denominations, there were Muslims of Shia and Sunni, there were fighters, and we were all together in this room. And it was a lively debate. People were talking about the different factions, about the struggles of trying to engage with people, particularly trying to get the rebels involved. And then we finished. And as we finished, I was asked to finish the meeting, and I said, without thinking, I said, well, can we finish in a prayer? And somebody said yes. And then I thought, wow, I've just realised I've got Bush, Shia and Sunni and Christian of various denominations. This is a difficult one. But I called over a Shia sheikh, and we stood side by side, and he said a Muslim prayer, Shia prayer, and I said a Christian prayer. And then we all stood in silence in this room. And as we stood, the bombs and the gunfire erupted just a few blocks away. And we were stood in silence all around. And I remember thinking at that time, this has to be the way. That out there, supporting the bombs and the fighting and the guns and what have you, is not the way. Now I've got friends whose houses in Homs, in the old part of Homs, which was the Christian area of Homs, the old city, have been destroyed. One Sunni friend of mine said to me 2 years ago, and I'm really taken by the comment, he said, my house was destroyed in Homs. And I said, well, who destroyed your house? And he said, well, the government destroyed my house. And then he said, well, but we were rung up by the government saying that our area was going to be bombed. And my father's reply, he said, was, if it gets rid of the terrorists, go ahead, bomb it. Now, there's a voice we don't often hear. Last year, I was with a Christian young woman, exactly the same story. And I couldn't believe it. They don't know each other, they're not connected. And she said, she showed me a picture of her house, which was bombed in Homs. I said, who is it bombed by? She said, by the government. She said, but if it takes the government to get the terrorists out to bomb my house, I accept that. Now that was a very... Then another Christian woman, I said to her, what about all this stuff about freedom? And I want to share with you her words, because one of the things I've been going to Syria to do is to listen to the voices of the people of Syria. What I say is irrelevant, it doesn't matter. What really matters is what the people of Syria say and what their experience is. And I said to her, what about all this talk about freedom? And this is her words, and I'm going to try and say it in the way she said it. She said, freedom? I hate the word freedom. Freedom to me means guns and bullets, suicide bombings and killings. I've deleted the word from my vocabulary. Don't talk to me about freedom. We had peace before they brought us freedom. Well, there are answers to that, but it's a very powerful voice. And actually it's one that you hear about. IDPs, internally displaced. We must not forget, of course, the refugee situation is horrendous. It's one of the worst humanitarian crises we've had yet. There are perhaps 1.8 million refugees in Lebanon. Let's not forget that 1/4 of the population of Lebanon is now Syrian refugees. We might take a few thousand over a few years, but they've got 1/4 of their population are refugees. And I visited some of them in Lebanon and some in Iraq in February as well. Turkey has about 1-point-something million. Jordan has another. I reckon about a few 100,000 have come across the Mediterranean. In Syria itself, there are 6.9 million internally displaced. And those internally displaced are from rebel-controlled areas. They've fled the rebel-controlled areas to the comparative safety of the government-controlled areas where they are being looked after. The government is not bombing its people. It's actually looking after its people. And those people have left the rebel-controlled areas. Yes, they've left some of the bombing where the government has been bombing the rebels, but they come through with the most horrific stories of the brutality of our so-called moderate rebels. I want to come across with a story. I can't remember which one of these women shared this. There we go. I want to get it right. That's what I'm going to... So this is the story of one of the women. They're fleeing the rebel-controlled areas to go to the government-controlled areas. The jihadists stopped all food supplies and placed snipers in mountains who shot us. We had to put the bodies of those who died in houses. We had no medical care for those who were wounded, and we had to use clothes as bandages. In 2 months, 250 people were killed by snipers, mortars, and at least 300, 400 were injured, some with minor injuries and others with severe injuries. After the continuous siege, we decided to escape from the village. As we ran, some went to the Turkish border, some to Idlib. 130 of those who fled to Idlib were captured and killed. Those who fled to Turkey had relatives there who helped them. Then the Syrian government brought us here and provided this accommodation. The media say the majority of the IDPs fled from the brutality of the Syrian government, but we had safety. I don't need the freedom the jihadists are calling for, as we already had freedom. Please help us by leaving us alone. We have enough of their freedom, thank you. Fadia says that her husband was killed by a sniper and he had 7 children. But another one tells how Aisha says, I lost my son aged 25 and my husband aged 52. When we escaped, they were captured and killed by beheading. My brother and my brother's son were also killed the same way. These are just, we hear this story again and again and again. The brutality of these so-called, if ever there were moderates, most Syrians you talk to in Syria, they say there are no such things as moderates. They laugh. In fact, one IDP in this camp, when we said to them, what about the moderates? He actually laughed. He said, there's no such thing as a moderate. They're brutal. Now, if they ever existed, they are so small in number and so powerless in the face of the multiple groups, most of which are extremists, most of which are jihadists, which we are supporting. And I think it is obscene that we are supporting these jihadists. Isn't it just incomprehensible that while the reporting of the media rightly is about the Iraqi government trying to liberate Mosul from the terrorists, the Syrian government is trying to liberate East Aleppo from the terrorists. And I'll come back to that in a moment. I'm going to let Vanessa speak. I'm nearly done. I'm going to let Vanessa speak about Aleppo and the journey to Aleppo. I want to say that that what she's going to share, I did that same journey. It is powerful. I think we're both, I know I'm still not recovered from it. The experience of the devastation. And we're always told it's the government who's destroyed them. So, yes, the government has bombed areas of towns and cities where there were rebels. We can't deny that, that's fact. But actually, also the word from those who fled these areas is that terrorists did an enormous amount of destruction. Any village or town that did not try to resist them, or any areas of community that tried to resist, they destroyed the homes, they destroyed the schools, they destroyed the hospitals, and the factories. As you go into Aleppo, you go through now one of the 4 industrial cities in Syria. Now these 4 industrial cities were the economic powerhouse of the country. This is where everything was, the manufacturing of the country was done, exported as well throughout the Middle East. 3 of those 4 industrial cities, and I mean cities, I've never seen anything like it going through the industrial city near Aleppo, where you go literally several miles through hundreds and hundreds of great factories are in ruins, they're destroyed, completely blown up. And the story is actually that the terrorists took all the machinery and anything that was worth anything they took to Turkey, and then completely destroyed those factories. 3 of the industrial cities in Syria have been destroyed by the terrorists, not by the Syrian government, to destroy the economy of Syria. And this sort of devastation is just something you go for a few hours. And then you get to West Aleppo. And West Aleppo, which is a majority of the people of Aleppo, are the Syrians, where Christians and Muslims and Shias and Sunnis and Druze and Kurds are living together in the city, and they are being bombed day in day out by the rebels, and by the so-called rebels, and they are desperate for, as I visited, we were guests of the Armenian community in Aleppo, and they said, we just want to see the terrorists defeated, we want them out of here. We want this war to end. And I finish with this. This is actually taken in Aleppo in September, where we had some of the Muslim leaders of the city. We also met the Doctors' Council in the city. Now, I'm sure Vanessa is going to speak a bit about the doctors and their reports of what the Doctors' Council of the city directly contradict the reports that we hear in our media. Our media's reporting is just diabolical, frankly. It's deeply upsetting. If you've seen some of the realities, then you just see the reporting. It's beggars belief. But here we had a big service in Aleppo where all the local Muslim leaders and the local Christian community gathered together. I was heavily criticised for taking a group to Syria in September on national media, and for meeting Assad as well. And somebody said to me, oh, by taking a group and going to a pastoral visit to visit the Christian communities in Syria, you're going to cause them problems because there'll be resentment about that amongst the Muslims. And I sent them that bottom picture, because that's in Aleppo with the Muslim leaders of the city. And the Syrians, and I stress this is not I'm not trying to define the sectarian nature at all, but I'm trying to say actually it's the Syrians together, the Syrian people, whether they're Sunni or Shia or Druze or Kurd or Alawite, the vast majority are desperate to see this war end and desperate to see Syria remain a diverse, plural, secular-led society, and have no confidence in if the so-called rebels win, which we support, which our government supports, they think that either they say either Syria will be a completely failed state, or an Islamist, worse than a dictatorship. And Syria, the nature of Syria as a country will be changed forever. And as a Christian priest, as a human being, more importantly, when I go and see this and I hear these voices, I cannot but share some of those realities, even though they're sometimes hard to hear, even though they go against the grain of some of obviously other narratives. One of the things I often say is there are many, many different narratives. All narratives contain some truth. No narratives contain the whole truth. And what we've got in what we've been given here is one very single narrative, which is twisted, manipulated, exaggerated, and with much wider agendas at stake. And we can talk about that later if you want to question about the bigger agendas, the international agendas. But I stress it's a profoundly complex, multi-layered context. There are numerous different players with multiple interests. Most Syrians wish for a pluralist, secular society. I keep attending meetings of parliament and things and saying all Syrian voices must be heard. And everywhere I go and everything I hear about, Syrians in Syria, their voices are not listened to. The only Syrians that are being listened to in this country are the Syrian expat, Muslim Brotherhood leaders, I have to say that's what they are, and people who support outside agendas. The Syrians inside Syria are not being listened to. And that actually ultimately people are just saying, for God's sake, end the war and get Syrian voices together. Get Syrian voices, inclusive Syrian voices, not with preconditions and not excluding the government, but Syrian voices together to work out how the future might be envisaged. Thank you very much.